Coming up on this week's episode of the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast, there's reflection on the final test of James Anderson's incredible career.
It was a nice throwback to early Jimmy Anderson. Actually, stylistically, a very similar delivery to a lot of his wickets on debut.
England thrashed the West Indies at Lords, but is it good for the health of the game?
I think we take how popular turning up as a punter to test match cricket in the UK for granted a little bit.
If it hadn't have been for Jimmy's last test match, it would have been very, very forgettable indeed, the whole thing.
The end of the T20 Blast group stage draws closer.
He's only played one ODI for England ever. I think it's one of the most weirdly under-discussed cricketers in the county game.
World champions India secure a 4-1 series victory in Zimbabwe.
He had one of the best IPLs literally ever last year. I really hope no one's mind is changing because he went a bit slow for this series.
And there's an exciting potential debutant in Australia's squads to tour the UK.
Exciting young kid with a very Australian name.
He's played 2 finals in his short career so far and done very well in both of them.
All that and more over the next hour.
This summer, Wisden are proudly being sponsored by Kia UK. Kia are leading the way in electrification with their groundbreaking range of EVs. Kia have taken strides in the future of mobility with their award-winning lineup, including the EV9 and EV6. They also have a commitment to movement that inspires and want to help cricket fans get closer to the action. Listen every week for Kia's Movement That Inspires moment for chances to win exciting experiences at the Kia Oval this summer. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly Podcast. If you need something to take your mind off what happened in the Euros last night, we're here for you. There'll be some comforting England-West Indies chat, some T20 Blast discussion. Could England really have an opening pair of salt and pepper in the not too distant future? And then there's some news from India and Australia, including the prospect of an exciting new debutant for the Aussies on their upcoming tour of England in September. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Katya Witney and Ben Gardner. But first, let's head to Mark Butcher for his thoughts on England's thumping win over West Indies at Lords. Butcher, very impressive pair of debut performances from Jamie Smith and Gus Atkinson, the 2 young Surrey players. I guess you'd say never in doubt.
Well, their talent is and has been pretty obvious for quite some while. I mean, it's a dream debut for Gus Atkinson, obviously, and he will, a little bit like Anderson 21 years ago. A good opposition to make your debut against in decent bowling conditions. I mean, the pitch was pretty blameless, as pretty much as you would expect at Lords for this time of year, given also the average sort of weather that we've had. I thought it was a pretty good pitch, and his performance was stellar, really. And I guess the satisfying thing from my point of view, if you'll allow me the indulgence, is when we were in the lead up to it and talking about Anderson's stepping down, etc. That one of the reasons that I thought that they wanted to hasten that was because of the fact that Jimmy, for all of his undoubted skill and quality and class, had kind of stopped taking wickets at that sort of rate. The sort of 5, 6, 7 fors, 10 fors in matches, and had been operating more in terms of figures like a first or second change bowler might do. And what England were desperate for was people being able to come in and take sort of hatfuls of wickets as the sort of like the spearhead of the attack. And of course, Atkinson comes in and does that. So, they'd have been absolutely delighted that worked out. And then equally, Jamie Smith did exactly what they want from somebody playing in that position, batting at, behind the top order, batting with the tail, showing that he had the ability to sort of go through the gears and accelerate when the tail was in with him. And as the biggest bonus was no buys for the test match and kept very tidily indeed. Both of them will, as we all know, will have sterner challenges in the times ahead. But it's a damn better place to start in your career with sort of confidence and not feeling out of place at that level. Hark everybody that had a go in the 90s to begin with, than it is, sort of starting off scratching around and wondering whether or not you're cut out for it. Both of those guys have got a fabulous head start.
Yeah, and Smith's performance, he's someone who people within the cricket media world have seen a lot of. More casual fans probably haven't seen that much of him. But we saw the different gears and different levels that he has. And I thought, and we'll get on to West Indies in a second, their bowling attack is still a very strong one. I know they were potentially undercooked, but Moti's a really good spinner.
Massively underdone, yeah.
The quick Seals bowled pretty well, and Smith batted sensibly until Wokes fell. I think he was on something like 37 off 84 when the second new ball was taken. And then when the tail came in, you could tell that he's someone who is able to shepherd the tail, and he's got shots in his locker that not that many players have.
Yeah, the exact reason that they were looking for somebody of that ilk, as opposed to sort of the out and out pure wicket keeper and competent batter. What they wanted was another top order player, really, who could play in the mode that the rest of the top six can play in. And that's what they got with Smith. I mean, eventually you could see a time in the future. Lots of things can happen, but a time in the future where he could bat 3 or 4 and perhaps not keep wicket anymore, get in the side just as a batter. But at the moment, England have wanted that depth in terms of the batting lineup, wanted that dynamism as well, and he's the guy that has it. And if the keeping improves at the sort of rate that most guys that get given that responsibility does, then he'll be pretty decent at that for the time that they want him to do it for.
What did you think about the Test match as a spectacle? Obviously, West Indies in their most recent Test had that historic win at the Gabba, but they'd played so little red ball cricket coming into this Test between them as a group. Like Jayden Seales and Jason Holder apart, both of whom were playing county cricket. The rest of them hadn't really played much. They had one tour game. Some of the squad weren't even there for that game because of the hurricane. It feels like this summer is the culmination of a lot of things we've been talking about for a long time in terms of the gap widening between the haves and the have-nots in Test cricket. And it's the second summer in a row where we've had a pretty underwhelming first Test of the summer at Lords. Last year against Ireland, this year against the West Indies. You look ahead to 2025, Zimbabwe are playing. Zimbabwe barely ever play Test cricket. These England guys come into a Test of summer. Joe Root's been playing for 3 months. Since it's 3 months since Yorkshire's first game of the season involving Root. We shouldn't be surprised by this sort of victory margin. In fact, I don't think that many people were surprised. The touring sides aren't given a chance really to properly compete.
No, they're not, and that's been the case for quite some time now. One warm up match, regardless of whether or not you've been playing, or whether you haven't been playing any red ball cricket. So even if you come into it straight off the back of a West Indies first class summer. One touring match in English conditions is just simply not enough. Let alone the fact that you've got a lot of batters making debuts, guys who've barely played any first class cricket, let alone Test match cricket. All of that adds up to what we ended up with, which was 2 days and less than a session in terms of the match. And in fact, if it hadn't have been for it's not a sideshow, but if it hadn't have been for Jimmy's last Test match, it would have been very, very forgettable indeed, the whole thing, barring the value to the debutants for England that did so well.
Does it worry you that so many Test matches in England are going this way?
Yeah. Simply, of course it does. But what's to be done about it? The touring teams, and we're guilty of this too. In the off seasons, in our winters, of kind of not wanting to spend any longer than is absolutely necessary in the in the host country, which means that you get very little time in the way of preparation. And so in that instance, test tours have got shorter. They've been way shorter for the best part of 2 decades now. And therefore, if you get caught cold, or if you've got a very inexperienced side, you have literally no time whatsoever to get yourselves ready, acclimatized, and to have any sort of idea as to what differences there are in playing cricket in the host country as opposed to at home. And look, you get what you get, don't you? I mean, I don't think that anybody was shocked that England won the Test match. They might have been a little bit surprised by the margin of victory and the time that it took. But you're kind of, you're going into the summer thinking that England should win 6 out of 6 and should win them comfortably, and that's not a great place to be for a spectator sport. People want that little bit of jeopardy. They want that sort of thought that the opposition could come in and turn you over. It becomes less and less likely the longer things go the way that they are.
I'm not writing West Indies off, by the way. They've won Test matches on each of their previous 2 tours of England. That bowling attack definitely has it in them to bowl England out for 150 if conditions are right. It's just, I do worry about, I think we take how popular turning up as a punter to Test match cricket in the UK for granted a little bit. You watch a lot of tests in Australia, other than the marquee series, they're not very well attended. Here, no. even for the first test of the summer, where England are massive favourites, it's pretty much a sellout throughout. And I worry that if this is something that we see more and more regularly, and given that the odds are stacked so firmly against the less wealthy opposition teams, we're just going to see this more, and people aren't going to want to pay £100 for a day at a test.
Yeah, and that could very easily happen. I think that if you dig a little bit deeper into the reasons behind this, Jason Holder went to quite great lengths to explain something to people who were listening, as to why it is so difficult for touring teams to spend much time in the countries that they go to, the ones that don't have the finances. And that is simply because of the cost. He said that back in the old days, I don't know, I can't remember how long ago this was now, but back when I probably started playing Test matches, there was a revenue sharing agreement in terms of television money, whereby the touring team would pick up a percentage of what was made throughout the course of the series, and that would either cover their costs or give them a little bit of a buffer once their costs were paid for. But now that nothing goes to the touring team, so therefore the cost borne by sending the teams out, flying them over, putting them up for how long it might be a month, it might be 3 weeks, whatever it might be, is all borne by the home board. And we know that times are tough everywhere, but England, Australia, and India. So there are reasons behind it. It's not so, and I hope it didn't come across. I was saying, the players can't be bothered to go away and tour anymore. It's kind of there might be a bit of that. I don't know, but more likely it's that the boards simply cannot afford for their teams to be away for 6-7 weeks and give them enough time to kind of be ready to be much more competitive.
It feels wrong that our grounds charge £100 per ticket for a normal day of Test cricket now, pretty much uniformly. At Lords, it's more expensive than that. When there's that much money involved, you've got the broadcast contract as well. It seems perverse to not pay the touring team anything, and it damages the quality of the product that people are paying a lot of money for if the touring side is so undercooked. It feels like the ECB should be more proactive. I know they've made more positive noises about revenue sharing over the last couple of years, but up until this point, nothing's actually been done.
No, and I think, I guess some sort of more universal agreement that this would be the case would be the thing to make it happen. I'm not entirely sure that the ECB should have to sort of stick their neck out if everybody else is going to keep things exactly the same as they are. I think it's probably a little bit delusional to expect that to happen. But that's kind of where we are, isn't it? That there needs to be an agreement, and it's for the good of the game as a whole. And the more competitive it is, the more watchable the sport becomes. It is, as it's always been. It's always incumbent upon the people that have more to give a leg up to those that have less. I mean, we wouldn't be in a situation where we have, what have we got now, 12 test playing nations. You could argue whether that's a good or bad thing. But, the reason for that, the reason behind, Sri Lanka being able to win a World Cup in 1996, India now being the preeminent team in the world, Pakistan being a huge force as they were through the 80s and 90s, was due to the fact that they were kind of helped out quite a bit in the times when they weren't. As we have said many, many times before, the game you cannot have a situation whereby you end up being the only show in town. You need people to play against, and in order to have people to play against, they need to kind of be able to keep their heads above water. And sometimes that means they need a bit of help from everyone else.
Well, after all this, I'm sure we'll be talking next week, responding to a epic West Indies win.
Wouldn't that be great? I think it's unlikely. I mean, I don't know where they're going to find the runs from, but you love the game to go into the fourth, get to the sort of back end of the fourth day and still be alive. That would be fantastic for the sport. Regardless, my feelings. I don't particularly care who wins as long as it's good fun to watch. And that was a little bit like seal clubbing at Lord's last week. And as I said, if it hadn't have been for the for the emotion and the great show that the public put out to say goodbye to Jimmy, then it would have been very forgettable indeed.
Well, here's hoping to a more entertaining and closer second test at Trent Bridge. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week. For this episode's Kia's Movement That Inspires moment, Kia, proud sponsors of the Kia Oval, are giving you the chance to attend England-Sri Lanka this September. Be it the final test of the British summer, where England will look to sign it off on a positive note. To win a pair of tickets to day 2 on September the 7th, all you need to do is enter via the link in the description. Now, let's pick our moment of the week in association with friends of the podcast, Charles Tyrwhitt.
You're a bit of a Charles Tyrwhitt fan, aren't you, Yas?
Yeah, I've got a couple of shirts that have served me well over the years. I've got a pink number that I'm especially fond of.
Yeah, you got a lovely blue one as well that suits you well. Did you know they've got options for summer as well? Polo shirts in a range of colours, zip necks, chinos and shorts too. They've got loads to choose from.
Well, I'll be sure to check that out. Thanks for letting me know. And listeners, if you fancy updating your summer wardrobe too, we've got a special offer for you. Check out charlestyrwhitt.com or visit one of their stores. And if you use the code Wisden20, you'll get a special discount of 20% off their full price collection. Anyway, Ben, what is our Charles Tyrwhitt moment of the week?
I mean, lots of moments from that test we could have gone with, but we've gone with James Anderson's final wicket in Test cricket, if only because it was just so perfectly James Anderson. I mean, just that beautiful curve kind of out the hand and then hitting the pitch and moving away a bit. So you've got the line makes Josh De Silva think maybe he could just nudge it through the leg side for a single, and all of a sudden it starts moving away a bit. Then moving away a bit more, he's sort of drawn forward, he's a bit overbalanced, takes the outside edge right through to the keeper. And it was so fitting as Anderson's final test wicket that he even then went on to drop what could have been his final test wicket to win the game himself with a sort of a caught and bowled chance, which was quite a funny moment. But yeah, it just, that I wonder if there'll ever be a bowler quite like that again, who when the things are in their favour can just create such like beauty as well as such sort of wicket taking prowess that just unplayable, even though you can kind of see perfectly how it's going to happen, like the moment he bowls it. It's just amazing. It
was a nice throwback to early Jimmy Anderson. Actually, stylistically, a very similar delivery to a lot of his wickets on debut at the same ground, turning batters into an S with balls that are angled in and then swinging away at the last minute. A lot of wickets in his first test match were bowled with that shape, this time the outside edge, but very similar.
Yeah, and there was another similarity with the Brathwaite wicket as well, wasn't there? Which then that came back in a long way, not quite as much as one of his most famous deliveries, I think, which is a new ball delivery in a West Indies tour.
2015. It was 2015 the series where he overtook both of them.
Okay, yeah, and that came back in an absolute mile to beat one of the best defensive batters in the game. This one came back in not quite as much, but still a decent amount that's going to get pretty much every player to take out middle. It was pretty good.
And it was very similar to the delivery that took him to 500 test wickets against Brathwaite at the same ground 7 years ago as well.
Basically anything that Anderson is doing now, he will have done at some point in his career before, because he's been going for that long.
That's a good point. A bit of England news. So Mark Wood has been added to the squad for the second test. Katya, who comes in for Anderson, do you reckon? Who takes the new ball with Woakes, assuming that Woakes is retained?
Well, that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Woakes is retained firstly, because he did fly under the radar slightly in that test. They've also got Dylan Pennington, who they could give a debut to, and Matt Potts is also in the squad. You'd think they'd want extra pace with Wood, so it could just be a straight swap of Wood for Anderson. But it'll also depend on conditions. It could be quite overcast at Trent Bridge later this week. So I think it will depend. I think they wouldn't have added Wood to the squad unless they intended to play him potentially. And given that Atkinson was their paciest bowler and looked most threatening at Lords last week, it kind of makes sense to go with Wood. But yeah, it'll just depend on conditions. And we'll have to see if Woakes is retained as well, because they could make a double swap for that too.
What do you think on Woakes, Ben?
Yeah, so I mean, there's been quite a lot of chat about him, obviously. So one in comparison to Anderson, where you've got, and we don't need to discuss the Anderson rights and wrongs of that before, but there's been the argument that, well, why are you keeping Woakes when you're thinking he might not? He's probably unlikely to play a part in the Ashes as well, when that's your reason for...
He's not ruled it out?
Well, that's the thing. That is what's interesting for one, is that it's been hard to work out exactly how much Woakes wants this in Test cricket, and I do think that last summer, like, I'd have been really interested to see how he'd gone in India, basically, because last summer was different. In the past, when he's been really good in England, he still hasn't out-bowled Anderson and Broad in the way that he did last summer, where he was just far and away, along with Wood, but as a traditional English team, was England's best bowler. That was
on some pretty flat pitches as well.
Exactly, yeah. So that there's that, and then there's the does he want it, because he seems to sort of write himself off and not select himself at the end of that summer as much as anything. And then when it came to the India tour, when he was left out, he said he was a bit disappointed, which is like, oh, okay, like, you shouldn't be disappointed if you read what you yourself had said, but that's interesting that you are. And then now saying he's maybe hungry for that Ashes, and why wouldn't he be, given the record he has to correct over there. And there's also just that he didn't bowl well, and he's had a tough start to the summer. He's spoken about him losing his dad and him taking a bit of a break from cricket for that, and he's also just generally been, like, last summer is kind of the exception to this, but he's kind of been a guy who's needed a bit more time to get into a season or a series, and so I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up bowling pretty well in the next two games. So I think it's like, it shouldn't be out of the question that that at least that he goes to New Zealand and Pakistan in this winter, and then if he goes well there, then he's a really intelligent, skillful bowler, and it hasn't quite worked out for him before. But I still think that, looking at him, there's no reason, kind of from first principles, that he shouldn't be good overseas. It's just that it hasn't happened. And with Anderson now as a mentor, who can just maybe put everything into saying to Woakes, this is what you need to do to be good in these conditions. The one thing is the accuracy. Like, he's a pretty attacking Test bowler in England, and sometimes that can mean the accuracy flies a bit, sort of like that can fall while he's just searching for wickets. And Anderson, as we've seen, his skill overseas, like, there have been, obviously he's had the skills, but it's been the accuracy that's meant that you're averaging 20, even if your strike rate is up at 70, because you're going at 2 and over kind of thing. That would be one of the things that Woakes need to work on. But I personally wouldn't write him off, even though his record overseas and his start to the season would suggest that that he's not going to make it. I still would be interested in him in that position. I think also, just in what Kash saying about who's going to come in, like, you might look at it and think, like, well, who's just going to come in as the Anderson new ball replacement, and then you're looking maybe at Pennington, because Potts also we've seen as a change bowler. I would like to see them just try guys in different roles, basically. Like, there has been, Wood is sort of a special case because he is just a proper kind of like fire it in as hard as possible kind of thing.
And he has to be near 100% speed to be as effective as he can be, really. Whereas, yeah, I completely agree with you, basically. I think you've seen what Atkinson's pace has done, and I said it on last week's pod, but what is exciting to me about Atkinson's use so far is that they've just used him normally, and he's a skillful bowler who happens to be quicker than the others, whereas Wood is a different type of bowler. So part of me thinks that England view it as those are two guys who will perform one role, and that of the third seamer, but I'd quite like to see Atkinson given the new ball, given how well he bowled the other day.
Yeah, if you have a guy who's 88 miles an hour and is going to chance top of off with that little bit of nibble and wobble seam, then that is just so much harder than doing that same thing at 83 miles an hour. And if you give him the new ball, it's going to make it even harder again. So yeah, I would like to see them basically try all those things. Try Potts with a new ball as well, even though he's done a bit of both in his Test career so far. Yeah, that's what this summer should be about. If you are retiring Anderson, should be not just like, they kind of know that Atkinson can do the change roll thing, but let's see if maybe he could actually be an exceptional new ball bowler, and then you've actually got like a really, really exciting Test cricketer there. As much as that was already pretty good what we saw in Test debut.
Alex writes in to say, listening to your post-Lord's Test pod, I was wondering what you all think of the ECB potentially helping to support Cricket Ireland to be used as a test match for travelling teams. So, for example, West Indies could play Ireland in a test match, which is partially supported by the ECB to support teams getting valuable practice before playing England. Could the ECB afford it? I'm not sure. I imagine that they could support 2 test matches a year for Ireland and maybe even include them in the TV rights. I appreciate it's a bit condescending, but I think it would provide support for test cricket for not just Ireland, but whoever the other touring side is as well. Katya, what do you make of that suggestion from Alex?
In theory, brilliant. It makes sense for teams who tour England to then also tour Ireland. We saw it with India last year before they had white ball series. They played. Did they have a white ball? They didn't have a white ball series here last year.
2 years ago, I think.
2 years ago, but they also played Ireland and then Australia this year as well. It makes sense to do a UK tour. I also feel like the Netherlands should also be included in that. I don't feel like teams who come to the Northern Hemisphere to play England tour the Netherlands as much as they should either. But the crux of it is the money. I don't know the practicalities of the ECB supporting Cricket Ireland or whether that would be something that could be or should be facilitated. I don't, but the issue is the money and the broadcast rights, that Ireland lose money whenever they host cricket or international bilateral cricket, they lose money. And there needs to be a way around that found in order to do that. And the fix so far has been to play England at Lord's once every couple of years or so. But if you're only really playing test cricket in your own hemisphere or near your own kind of home venue at that time, it's not really sustainable practice. And we've seen Ireland have to cancel home tours because they are losing money playing cricket. So it's another kind of but product of the financial system that doesn't only benefit people who are at its top, if that makes sense, that Ireland aren't able to host that kind of cricket.
They want to play cricket. They want to play more cricket at home, obviously, but they struggle to. That's
the thing. They can't do it without losing money, and that's what's stopping it. ECB helping them out, I don't know what the practicalities of that would be or how that would even work. But in theory, teams who come here should also be playing some form of cricket against Ireland. Whether that's they send a test team here and also have like a white ball team here, or even play condescendingly warm-up matches against Ireland, I don't know. But it's a bit of a puzzle.
I would be interested to hear, and maybe we'll do this in the next couple of weeks, what the perspective in Ireland is around Test cricket. Is it actually something they want? The group stage of the Vitality Blast is nearing its completion. Birmingham atop of the North Group, Surrey atop of the South Group, both are assured of home quarterfinals. Sussex and Somerset are through in the South Group. Essex and Gloucestershire are vying for the final spot there. In the North Group, Lancashire, Leicestershire and Northants currently occupy the last 3 top 4 spots, but it's very tight. Katya, on Essex, people are getting almost too excited about the prospect of Salt and Pepper opening the batting for England. Michael Pepper isn't someone we've talked a lot about on the pod. Why are people interested in him now?
Beyond the pun potential in batting with Salt. Well, he scored 100 the other day against Sussex, and it was really good. He basically single-handedly chased down, I think it was about 210 that Sussex scored, and that's his second 100 of the season. And you said there has been 400s in the T20 Blast this season, so he's got half of the hundreds so far in this season of the T20 Blast.
That knock was ridiculous. It was 120 or 53. He was the only Essex top 5 batter to get more than 11. They were 53 for 4, chasing 210, as Katya said, and they won it with 9 balls to spare.
Yeah. I will just say, on the other of Essex's top order not getting any runs, that pitch at Hove has been a bit of a road. So Sussex have scored 200 on it in all of their 3 last matches.
Oh, wow.
And it's been a really high scoring pitch. So it shouldn't caveat the Pepper innings too much, but it should have been a bit more of a road than it was for the other Essex batters. And that Sussex bowling attack is also very good, so that should also be another thing that we look into and say that was actually a really good knock from Pepper. It's got Tamar Mills and Ollie Robinson, Jack Carson, really good bowlers. And he also sustained, when I was looking at the innings, there was no actual kind of like acceleration. He was just pretty much from the word go at the same level throughout. And on like Pepper, he's been around for a couple of years, but I think he's kind of flown under the radar a little bit because he's a bit older than the core of young batters that have come through and kind of grabbed everyone's attention, like Jax and the rest. So he's 26, which is not old, but in terms of like being the young kind of new cricketer coming through, it kind of is. He was Essex's leading run scorer in the Blast in 2022, which coincided with a move up the order. So it feels like he's made that kind of switch up the order and had some immediate success with it that is now sustained for quite a while. He doesn't get many franchise gigs either. So he played the Abu Dhabi T10, but he hasn't really done much franchise cricket other than that and the 100.
And he's not gone well in the 100.
Not, yeah.
And I think we're now in an era where it is very hard for an English white ball player to get picked without doing well in the 100.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think if you think that he's had success after moving up to the top of the order where everyone wants to bat, England have got so many options in the top of their T20 order that are ahead of him in the pecking order. So when you think of Jax and Salt and Brooke and Duckett and the rest of them that were in Antigua, Antigua? What? I don't know why I said Antigua.
Caribbean.
The Caribbean.
Yeah.
Who will survive the kind of next rotation of players in and out of England's T20 squad. He's probably in that group below it, with your Jamie Smiths and your, maybe Tom Bands had a really good T20 blast, so maybe he's back into the equation, Jordan Cox's, people like that. It's not out of the question that a couple of injuries, a couple of people rotated out, he comes into the side, but he's not quite in that top core of people pushing for selection just yet, I don't think.
Yeah, it feels like a big 100 for him though, because you're right that he hasn't gone well so far, but it's also last year in the 100 he had 3 innings, faced 5 balls and was dismissed by 3 of them and hit 1-4. So that's obviously that's not good, but it's also facing 5 balls and you sort of, and then the previous year he kind of averaged just under 20, struck at 120, which is that's, again, it's a little bit neither here or there. He had a decent go in the ILT20 earlier this year, where he averaging 23, striking 140. Like that's not great, but it's not like write someone off. And he has just been getting better and better and better year on year and year in the Blast. Like it's kind of 3 seasons in a row that he's had pretty good years. Like he needs a standout 100 season, I think, to get a go in.
I think to even be in the conversation.
Yeah,
really,
yeah, but he's now, like, I think if you were to have a good 100 season, then it's then that series at the end of the summer against Australia, when England will be looking to try a few guys, it's not impossible. I think
with 100, it's more that it's actively held against you when it comes to selection if you've been involved and not done well, because that is a clear standard above the Blast. So it's almost been as easy as it ever has been in identifying where players are in their white ball development because of the 100. Ben, Birmingham are the dominant side in the North Group. Why are they good?
Well, they've got
good players.
Good players. That's definitely a big part of it. I mean, you've got Sam Hain, who's one of the best sort of batters on the county circuit, basically across all formats. And he's doing his thing. He's sort of striking around 140, averaging 65. So you're basically never going to collapse in that. But the 3 players I think who were kind of emotions, they got 2 really exciting young players. Jacob Bethel, who people have heard talked a lot about. He's having a good season. He's averaging 40, striking 160. He might well get a go in that series at the end of the summer. But then also there's Dan Mousley, who had a decent under-19 World Cup with England a few years ago, and is actually who knows what's going to happen with England's finger spinning all rounders, but he does bowl off spin. And is this season going at 6.5 and over, has got 12 wickets. Those are very good numbers. So we'll see in the 100. And again, he's averaging 4 strike 140. And they've also got Danny Briggs, who I think is one of the most weirdly under-discussed cricketers in the county game. Like, it's such a good career, isn't it?
We should do a segment on that next week. Yeah. Email in podcast@wisden.com. The most under-discussed players in the county game. I think Briggs is a very, very good shout. It wasn't that long ago he was on England Lions tour. He obviously played for England about 11 years ago.
Yeah, so his last game for England came when he was 22 years old, I think. And
really?
Since then, yeah, so in 2014, I'm pretty sure it was 22, unless I've got the maths wrong. January 2014 was the last time he played for England. He's only played 1 ODI for England ever, which baffles me. And because he's been just like one of the, the best county spinners in an era when it's very difficult to be a county spinner for a long period of time, for a long time. And this season has been, just another season where he's been, as good as he kind of regularly is. But so he's got 22 wickets. That's the second most in the country, and his economy is 6.04. Like those are ridiculous numbers.
Yeah.
And actually, again, I'm not saying it definitely will happen, and England will probably, I guess, look to the future because they just like looking to the future. But if
is he a better bowler than Tom Hartley?
Well, yeah, there's that, yeah, and then also even if they're just looking for, like, say, to have 2 white ball finger spinners with Moeen Ali sort of maybe leaving the scene, we don't know. But if that were to be the case, then Briggs would be a very good stopgap shout. I think that's probably not going to happen because people forget he exists all the time. Yeah. Maybe it's part of the issue where he's born in the Isle of Wight. People sort of forget that that's part of England and then forget that Briggs is around.
I'm sure that's the reason. Yeah. But also with Birmingham, it is just a very strong side. You look down from 1 to 11, pretty much. Like another player who I think is criminally underrated is Richard Gleeson. I know that he played for CSK in the IPL this year, so obviously he's catching attention from some quarters. But he's obviously had a very weird career trajectory, coming in very late. He's genuinely quick. His numbers this season are really, really good. And then another player who I'd say is a similar bracket, Lintott, every year does well, particularly in the Blast. And I think it's so valuable to have a dependable wrist spinner. And then, obviously they're a spin heavy side because they've also got Moeen back. And it's quite heartening to see actually Moeen was basically playing for them like 2 or 3 days after the T20 World Cup was done and dusted. So they look very, very good.
Yeah, just such an all-round attack. They've got 6 bowlers who've taken 9 or more wickets, and then another 4 who are kind of on that 4-wicket thing. So just so many options at any point.
Katya, same question to you about Northants. We haven't talked about them much this season. I was trying to work out what they're doing well. Have you got an answer?
Yeah, I was trying to think, because when you look at it on the face of it, you look at their side and it's not like you would say with Birmingham, they're not packed with those kinds of names. They've got good players in. Ravi Bopara's again going well in the T20 Blast. They've got David Willey captaining them, and I was looking at them, they've got David Willey and Ravi Bopara in their top 4, so that's 2 all-rounders in their top 4, plus Sayed Zaib at number 5, who's also an all-rounder. So their side is packed with all-rounders. They've got Ashton Agar as well now, over from the World Cup, and that's a really good addition to have kind of midway through the tournament. So the all-rounders is a factor, but also they've come out on the right side of some really tight results. So they've not been a side that's kind of blasted their way into contention with like packed out power in either like discipline, but they have managed to come on the right side of tight results. So in their first game, they won on the last ball. They had 2 really tight wins against Worcestershire, a tie against Leicestershire, another fairly close game against Durham. So they've kind of managed to sneak through by performing really well under pressure rather than being one of the sides that has out and out power, and it's really worked for them. So they're currently 4th in the North group, and they're tied on points with Leicestershire in 3rd, and it's a really tight kind of top 4 or numbers 2 to 4 in the North group. So it's not that far from thought that they could kind of sneak through into that kind of final day contention.
Yeah, it's worth running through it, I think. So Northants, as you say, equal in points last year, but have played a game fewer, crucially. Yeah. And then you've also got actually Yorkshire and Durham in 5th and 6th, also in the midst, because they've got a point fewer than Northants and Leicestershire. They've both played 13 games. So Northants basically need 1 win in their last 2 to be guaranteed, which is a pretty good position to be in. And then maybe but if they lose both of those, then they'd be struggling. But you've also got a 3-way shootout between Leicestershire, Yorkshire and Durham. So that's pretty exciting. South Group less so, but Essex and Gloucestershire, basically, if Essex beat Hampshire, which they'd be favourites for, but Hampshire are 6, so they're not awful, then they'll go through. If not, Gloucester need to beat Middlesex, who have not had a great season. And then their net run rate is slightly better, so they'll probably be going through. But yeah.
Are we enjoying the Blast this year?
Yeah, I am. Are you?
Good. Yeah, I genuinely am. I've got a point to make on it, but I want to go to you two first.
Yeah. Well, I said before the pod that I thought it had been a really high scoring year for the Blast, which Ben then proved me completely wrong on for the last 2 years.
Not completely wrong, just slightly wrong.
Yeah. I don't know why every time I look at the Blast, it seems like a team has scored over 200. But that's good. I know your point is a point about how quick the games go, which I agree with, which is why it's really good. The one moan I have, which is a moan every year, is how it's structured with finals day and the rest of the competition, because it just feels like you build up this momentum where you look and there's always some form of blast going on, and then you completely stop it, and then finals day happens right at the end of the season, and it just feels completely ridiculous that that's how it's structured. Completely
agree on the loss of momentum. Yeah, my point is that the over rates are so good that it actively improves the viewing experience, because the momentum of a game is so much greater. In the IPL, for example, the T20 World Cup, games take nearly 4 hours. A blast game is generally done in 3. In the IPL, it feels like you can have a massive wicket at the end of the 15th over, and then it's 5 minutes until the next ball's bowled, and it genuinely sucks the life out of a game, I think, whereas the blast is so quick. And I think that's what T20 cricket should aspire to be. Weirdly, I think T20 cricket at the top level is the slowest format. Like, when people talk about attention spans, they're like, oh, kids these days, they don't want to watch a test match that takes 8 hours. People need to be stimulated throughout, and I think T20 games at the top level often are the least engaging because of how long there is between individual balls, etc. And the blast gets that right. I think it's extremely watchable. And you mentioned finals day. Genuinely my favourite week in the cricket calendar is the blast quarterfinals week. It's brilliant. The crowds are so into it. It's really high level of cricket. Extremely watchable. And it is a shame that you lose the momentum that you build up to at the end of the group stage, because there's a massive gap between now and when the quarterfinals are played. Before we continue, a couple of plugs. We have another live show coming up, this time in Birmingham. It's our first non-London live show, so we're very excited for it. Butch will be there, as will a yet-to-be-announced special guest. It's on Thursday, the 12th of September, just after the end of the final test of the summer at Hockley Social Club. Tickets are £15. Great value. Promises to be a really fun night. Link to the tickets in the description below.
What we should try and do is get Danny Briggs there and then not talk about him the whole evening.
Or at least get a Danny Briggs cutout.
Very good. Not very good. Also, get set for another historic tour to Pakistan this autumn. With Jimmy Anderson taking his final bow against the West Indies, you can secure your spot to watch England's first away tour since his retirement. England will look to replicate their successful 3-0 win, which Gullivers were a part of in 2022. The tour was a huge success, and their team of staff can't wait to return and rekindle the local relationships they made. Experience the vibrant culture, beautiful landscapes, and the incredible cricketing atmosphere that Pakistan has to offer. Follow England's 3 test series with Gullivers' fantastic choice of ticket packages. Visit gulliverstravel.co.uk and book your dream cricket holiday today. Ben, India have just played a 5-match series in Zimbabwe. You can't accuse India of not playing enough. We fairly criticise India for how much of the ICC pie they take, how the distribution of revenue is skewed, etc. But no one does as much as they do for ensuring that bilateral series happen. And they play these tours that, let's be honest, the other big guys, England and Australia, never do.
Yeah, and I mean, because I remember looking at it, this was ages ago, but looking at and actually trying to work out how long they would ever go without playing cricket, and it wasn't more than like a couple of weeks. And I was looking at the end, this series about to, and I was like, hang on, when are they going to next play again? And good as gold, they announced a series against Sri Lanka to start at the end of the summer, and yeah, they're great at that. And this was a fun series in parts. Zimbabwe won the first game, which was great for them, and just. India obviously had a very weakened team because no one could get out of Barbados with the hurricane there, and then they had to sort of wade through this, massive crowd in Mumbai that was waiting to sort of welcome them to a hero's welcome. So that they already hadn't picked their T20 World Cup players, their best T20 World Cup players, and then the fringe players who were to join weren't there for the first game. And obviously Zimbabwe are actually quite good, even though they didn't qualify the T20 World Cup. But just for the narrative of the T20 World Cup champions, their first game after that tournament being a defeat to a team who didn't even qualify was very fun. But India, shock. They've got loads of strength and depth, basically. Abhishek Sharma scored 100 in his second dig. That was pretty good. There's going to be a bit of just a little bit more. I mean, before we weren't sure how they were going to sort of fit 7 players into 6 in that top order, and they eventually did it in, a way that won a World Cup. Now they're going to have to find a way to have a team that doesn't have Virat in it, doesn't have Rohit in it, doesn't have Jadeja in it. And that opening berth battle will be a really interesting one, because Shubman Gill, captain in this series, he was the leading run scorer in it, but he also only struck at 126, which is below what India would hope from in their kind of new style. Jaiswal went well when he batted, so did Gaikwad, and you had that innings from Abhishek Sharma as well. So there are a few candidates there.
I find it fascinating how much weight India put on bilateral series, because this is a lower standard than the IPL.
Yes, that's true.
Sikandar Raza and Muzrabani are class, but it is not a bowling attack that compares to IPL franchises. So I find it sometimes kind of mad how much importance is put on performances in these series. It's really good that they sort of work out roles within the team. I think it must be helpful for them to work out where a player might thrive. But in terms of working out how good they are, Shubman Gill having 5 quiet games against Zimbabwe, that he's good. This shouldn't tell you otherwise.
Yeah, I guess the only thing though with Gill is that he is such a classical player that you want him to show he can dominate and he can score like blitz from ball one. Yeah, he has at times, but I think if you're backing a guy, you want to know he can do it like a lot. I'm not saying this is going to be the death knell in Shubman Gill's T20I career. But
he had one of the best IPLs literally ever last year.
Yeah.
He averaged 60, was the leading run scorer by 160 runs, 300s, 450s, striking at 160.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he can bat.
I'm not changing. I really hope no one's mind is changing because he went a bit slow for this series. But point taken.
But by that same logic, are you then saying that Jaiswal's knock doesn't count because it's better that he did it in the IPL?
I'm not in not counting territory.
Yeah.
I just think that when Indian players, and it's quite a specific thing for Indian players because their league is so good and they play so much bilateral cricket, I don't think performances in one series should carry too much weight because you have such a large body of evidence to make judgments of the players on, and one series is a very small one. Like I don't think a player should be picked for India in a T20 World Cup if there was a T20 World Cup next month because they had a good bilateral series here, if that makes sense. And it's quite interesting because I think similar to what we're saying with Michael Pepper in the 100, there is just more things to look at when you're selecting a T20 player now compared to the past. There's less almost of a judgment call to make because they play at different levels, whereas before and in other formats is just domestic, international, nothing in between. With a T20 cricket, you have all these levels in the middle, and international cricket actually outside of World Cups isn't necessarily even at the top. But yeah, point taken. Some news from Australia. They have announced a pair of squads for their upcoming white ball tour of England. Possibly a series you didn't know was actually happening, but Australia are coming here this summer. They play 3 T20Is and 5 ODIs in September. The final ODI is taking place on September the 29th in Bristol. I dread to think of what the weather might be like for that one. But that squad includes a new face, Cooper Connolly, 20 years old, only played 20 professional games across formats. Ben, why is he in?
Well, partly because he just was player of the match at the BBL final, which can do quite a lot for you. I mean, exciting young kid with a very Australian name, and also because they're just this is, as much as this is a series that you're wondering why it's happening, and it's kind of because Australia and England need to play each other pretty constantly to keep the lights on. Essentially, it is also a chance to have a look at some players, and he's a guy that they'll want to have a look at. He's of the modern T20 breed, and that knock in the final was properly ridiculous.
Yeah, it was last year's final, and he'd barely played pro cricket at that point. It was only 19. He hit 25 off 11 at the very end in a very tight run chase. So yeah, he extremely highly rated for a long time. He was picked in an under 19 World Cup squad when he was 16, and I guess they like his character. He made his first class debut in the Sheffield Shield final. Never played first class cricket before and hits 90. So he's played in 2 finals in his short career so far and done very well in both of them. But otherwise, it's a pretty familiar group of players. One notable absentee is Pat Cummins, who's taking a breather. Australia have a massive home summer. They play 5 test matches against India at home. That series starts in November, so that's not actually that far away from the end of that England tour. But, Ben, it's interesting that Cummins is a busy man over this summer playing cricket elsewhere.
Yeah, and Australia have kind of insisted that this kind of hasn't come into it, but it's hard not to see, Pat Cummins signs massive multi-year deal with MLC team, and then Pat Cummins sits out of ODI series against biggest rivals when he's, the World Cup winning captain a year before. And, maybe this is just fine, and maybe this is just the way things are now, but it's at least it's almost worth noting that this kind of thing passes almost without comment, that, a guy can miss, a captain can miss what kind of on paper is a marquee series, and sort of in part because he's, picking up some coin in a league that didn't exist 2 years ago, sort of thing. It's a slightly odd situation, but also maybe it's fine. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't make me angry, but maybe it'll make some people angry. So it's worth saying at least.
Yeah, I think I struggle to have any feelings about it, just because I struggle to have any feelings about this tour.
Tune into the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast during it.
I'm sure we'll get 20 minutes about who should bat 5 for England in their new era of ODI cricket. Potentially an exciting new era. We could have a new captain, could have a new coach. It could be a huge series.
That's true, and maybe bigger for England than for Australia, because Australia are sort of ticking along and also they can do what they like between World Cups and turn up and be the best team in them, whereas England need to have 4 years ago absolutely perfectly to then win a World Cup on boundary count. So
I think with the Cummins thing, I think there's also something to be said that he didn't play a lot of franchise cricket until this year and went in the IPL, and that kind of means he's got credit in the bank to do this kind of stuff. And also because he's now won everything, he's also got credit in the bank. Whereas, so Australia's World Cup winning captain misses are we calling it a marquee series?
I reckon the ECB probably are calling it a marquee series.
It kind of is better than Australia captain who's just lost everything, goes off and earns money in MLC while they send second tier team to England. I think that would be a lot worse than this.
And when we're talking about what's taxing and what's restful, being having to go around 8 different grounds over the course of 3 weeks to watch it rain in England sounds like quite a lot less fun than sunning yourself in the US and bowling 4 overs every couple of days.
And it is, the MLC is quite exciting in that it is something new, and you don't know what that might look like in a few years. And I can understand why a player like Cummins might want to be invested in a competition.
He's basically the face of it now, having signed that big deal with it.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I understand why he's doing it. Anyway, I think that's it for today's show. Thanks, Katya. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, listeners. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back with the Women's Cricket Weekly episode later in the week. Kia wants to help you get closer to the action and create inspiring memories that will last a lifetime. Last year, Kia launched a competition to give young cricket players the opportunity to play at the inspiring Kia Oval. And this year, they want to do it all over again. The Kia Young Cricketer competition is an amazing experience for 11 to 16-year-olds to live out their cricketing dreams. The day will consist of a morning coaching session from Surrey's fantastic coaching team to an afternoon tournament on the iconic outfield itself. If you are aged 11 to 16 and want to experience this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity on September the 14th, all you need to do is enter by the link in the description.